Alrighty. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. This is going to be a Mainnet 2022 takeaways for those that weren't able to join us at our Mainnet Summit. We're super stoked. It was a massive success. We had over 2K in attendance and over 2,000 virtual attendees over 3 days, 236 sessions, 288 speakers, with backgrounds spanning crypto, TradFi, art, philosophy, NFTs, really anything you could think of. Before we jump in, as always, we'll start with a quick disclaimer. All opinions expressed by our hosts and our guests are merely their own opinions. They do not reflect any endorsements or opinions of their companies. This discussion is meant for informational purposes only. You should not take their opinions as investment advice, as you will be solely responsible for your own investment. Hosts and guests may hold cryptocurrencies discussed in this Twitter Spaces. Additionally, certain Messari employees are required to disclose their holdings, which is updated monthly and available at our website. As always, I'll share a tweet with those disclosures. Let's jump into it. Again, an awesome summit. Most of us are getting back on our feet after 3 days worth of content. And I came to the group here. We've got Sami, Stephanie, Dustin, and Mihai joining us today, all analysts, and kind of touch base on what their general takeaways were from this past week. Obviously, with 236 sessions, there are plenty of themes to take away, but it was interesting that when the group came back with their notes, there were some themes that they all shared that they thought might be important, especially in this market, to possibly become catalysts moving into the next bull market. We'll touch on a few things here, that being the TIPIN summit that ran in conjunction or ran parallel to Mainnet. Scaling was obviously a major theme, whether it be L2s, alt L1s, or modular chains. And then we'll finish with app value accrual, something that was highlighted in a main stage panel with Ryan and Chris Berneski. So to start it off, this was something brand new for me. I had no clue that TIPIN was even going on, but our speakers here, our analysts, actually went to the event. So if someone wants to start, what even is TIPIN, and why are you guys excited about it?
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and kick off kind of this subject and explain what TIPIN is, and then we can have Dustin and Stephanie jump in with any questions or additional insight. But so TIPIN stands for token-Incentivized Physical Infrastructure Networks. It's also known as proof of physical work. Everybody's kind of trying to assign a catchy name to it. But overall, I guess stepping backwards a little bit, so you have these crypto economic protocols, and what we found over the past few years is that they're extremely powerful at incentivizing and coordinating human activity, right? And so when you use these economic principles to build out this real world decentralized infrastructure and hardware networks, you're able to do it much quicker and kind of bootstrap that supply. And so going back to what TIPIN is, so it's like this novel token distribution mechanism that essentially rewards participants for verifiable activity in the real world. And that's kind of a mouthful, but just like to break that down a little bit, one of the easiest examples that most people talk about is Helium. So Helium started with its IoT network, and basically it rewarded participants who bought these hotspots, set them up in their windows, and then just kind of contributed to Helium's IoT network coverage. And for doing so, they were rewarded with token rewards. And so Helium, in a little bit over a year, basically bootstrapped 1 million hardware devices on their supply side. And this kind of got everyone thinking, okay, so like what else can we kind of use these crypto economic protocol incentives for? And so that kind of just led to like an emergence of different networks that are using these crypto economic principles to bootstrap storage networks, compute networks, mobility data networks. There's a bunch of these protocols out there now. And so that's kind of my high level overview. Stephanie, you attended the conference too. I mean, what were some of these protocols that like caught your eye initially? Were they all kind of brand new to you, or were you aware of some of them that were there?
Yeah, so I was really pleasantly surprised because when I first entered the crypto space a few years ago, one of the first networks that I ever heard of was Helium. Like you mentioned, it's an IoT network, and I just thought it was so fascinating that anyone could get these little devices and contribute resources, and therefore in the future, we could share IoT together. I could access a decentralized network as opposed to going through a centralized provider. And hadn't really paid attention to the space in a little while, but was pleasantly surprised to show up and see that there were a number of other projects building. There's Pollen Network, which is a similar data network, which is a slightly different design to Helium as well. I can't recall the name, but something about decentralized energy storage, which is really, really fascinating to help with the grid and some of the problems we have, with the energy grid at the moment. Also, IODEX was there, which is also another IoT network. And really something that I remember chatting with you on the sidelines is that, within the last 5 years, we see so many more projects, but given the excitement in the room and, the speed at which people are building or which projects are building, it felt to us that, in a year from now, we can imagine that room going from, let's say, like 150 people to in the thousands. And just so much to build and so much to learn. And I was really happy to learn about a few new projects I hadn't heard about. And I just feel like they're taking off at this moment in time.
I want to jump in. Oh, go ahead, Mihai. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was a great introduction from Sami and from Stephanie. And I would add on top of the question that I've got from quite many people. What is actually TIPIN? So what does it stand for? And it is a geeky acronym for token-incentivized physical infrastructure networks. And I was surprised that very, very few people actually knew about it, but they were able to connect to the corresponding projects assigned to it.
I did want to kind of step back real quick and ask a question. So it seems like the few examples that were given, either Helium or Pollen, people are setting up small devices to create a network, right? So I think it's easy to understand. You purchase this device, and in adding to the network, you're able to build some sort of revenue or accrue tokens by having these pods set up. What were some other examples from a Web3 infra perspective that were still TIPIN or proof of physical work that weren't strictly data or network driven? Like, is there storage examples or maybe examples that miners might be privy to with ETH moving off of proof of work, where the same sort of thing could happen? You're still using a proof of physical work token structure, but it's not strictly you setting up a hub, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a lot of projects that can actually fit in this proof of physical work framework, and a few more established protocols that would fit in here can include like Filecoin. So Filecoin essentially just is incentivizing storage providers to basically go online, stake the filled token, and when they do that, they're basically able to offer storage services to the network, and in return they get transaction fees, as well as they're awarded the network's block subsidy. And so other protocols that kind of fit in the compute and storage category include like Arweave and Render. So Render Network is a distributed GPU computing platform, and we have seen some discussions start popping up after the Ethereum merge, where it essentially made all GPUs on the network no longer needed. People were kind of looking to basically take those GPUs that they already had and put them to work on new protocols. And so people were looking at Render as an option, Live Peer, and Akash as, viable options. And so there's kind of two types of like hardware devices. I don't want to get like too into the weeds here, but like there's non-fungible hardware, and we're all kind of familiar with like non-fungible means. So this could be like your Helium hotspot. So essentially where you locate that hotspot ends up like having an impact on the network, as far as like your rewards and as far as like what type of data goes through your hotspot. But when you talk about like compute and storage protocols like Filecoin, Arweave, even Render, you could consider the hardware for these protocols to be fungible, where if you set up a storage server in Singapore, it's kind of the same thing as setting it up in Hong Kong, where like that 1 terabyte of storage in Hong Kong is equal to 1 terabyte of storage in Singapore. And so you're starting to see like these two different subsectors in the proof of physical work, or TIPIN, sector, where you have like non-fungible hardware and then fungible hardware. And so looking into like the non-fungible hardware category, we've seen protocols like HiveMapper pop up, and they're basically doing like decentralized maps. And so essentially what HiveMapper does is they reward service providers for setting up like a HiveMapper, setting up a dash cam in their car, and then they're rewarded for driving around and contributing the data that they record from their dash cam to the network. You're also seeing this in the environmental sector. So there's this protocol called WeatherXM, where essentially you're setting up these like mini weather stations where you can set them up like anywhere in the world, kind of like a Helium hotspot. And essentially you're contributing like decentralized weather data to the network, and you're able to kind of give a lot more detailed information, just because you've got a larger number of weather stations out there, and it's not just coming from one centralized source. So that's kind of just like a list of projects are building in this overall sector.
Something I think about a lot, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think, is where the tokens play into these networks. I feel as though there's a few different models, the burn and mint, and I believe a couple others, and I'll let you guys get into the meat of that, because I know some of you are more familiar than me. But more so in terms of how to reward participants in the network. My initial thought is, would it be more effective if some of these rewards were, just in, Ether stable coins, rather than, a volatile currency that, could be affected more with more volatility than, something that we expect to be stable moving forward? So yeah, I know LivePeer, for example, which is, decentralized video transcoding, they use the LPT token, as, a staking and security mechanism for people to participate and to provide services on the network, whereas, fees are paid and generated in ETH. So I know there's a lot of different, ways that different projects do this, but curious to hear, I think, Sami, Mihai, what you think of some of the networks that are, not only using the tokens as, some kind of like security mechanism, but also, having payments be in the native token of the network.
Yeah, I can jump on this question first. LivePeer does something unique where transactions or transaction fees are required to be paid in Ethereum, but like you said, they still use their native token to reward network participants, and that's because you can't reward tokens. I mean, this is something that we can discuss here, but I don't think it's possible to really reward participants in a currency that's not native to the protocol, because at that point someone has to go out there and buy it. Whereas the whole idea behind these protocols is that they're able to bootstrap, like if you're talking about physical infrastructure, it's able to bootstrap the supply side of these physical infrastructure networks by just using this currency that the protocol can mint. And so if that wasn't the case, if they had to go out there and acquire, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin or USDC, then you need some type of centralized team that's basically going to be willing to fund that and commit basically to funding the network. And so I think that kind of goes against the whole ethos of the network, where the protocol is like this sovereign entity which mints its own currency, which it uses to then fund kind of the services that the network provides. That's how I see it. I don't know if somebody else sees it differently. Dustin, do you kind of have any takes here, looking from the outside in?
I totally agree. I mean, because you got to think about what these things are really doing. In my mind, like I try to equate it back to like.
You just cut off, by the way.
All right, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Alrighty. I'll kind of just start from the back. So I mean, from a hardware company, right? If you're starting a hardware company, you would have to go raise a bunch of money from VCs. And what you're doing when you do that is you're actually selling equity, right? You're saying like, here's 20% of the company, give me X amount of $1 million, and I'm going to go buy it and build all this hardware myself. What you do with the token is you actually get to say like, okay, but I'm not going to raise any money. I don't have to buy any of that. You can just essentially sell the token on a per usage basis. So I can say, Sami, I'm going to give you my token over the next, let's say the next year, if you go spend the upfront money to go buy the pollen hotspot, stuff like that. So where each of the suppliers, so like you running a hotspot, you're the one putting up the capital, the US dollars, and the hard money to acquire, right? And then the network itself, it actually just gets to print essentially, out of thin air, its own token and give that to you as reward. And that's a really good way, like you've been describing it as bootstrapping. It's a really good way to do hardware startups where you really couldn't have done that before, right? In an easy way. So what you kind of do need, and you understand like where these products are in their like development life cycles, is really, really early, right? I mean, you look at the usage on this stuff, it compares very little, to the traditional networks. So you're just still in that phase, and I kind of probably see that phase lasting for the next couple of years, 5 years, right? Where you do have to keep selling, sort of call it pseudo equity, in order to incentivize people to, give you the money, cash, or give you the hardware in there. So I think it's just like it's a very natural fit for me, having the token inside of whether the fee model or incentive model, et cetera.
I want to ask a quick question, Mihai, before you jump in there. Prior to these proof of physical work networks and protocols existing, what was used to bootstrap previously? And then to build off that question, and this is kind of feeding off of Stephanie's question, and kind of where Dustin was getting at, what token structure from the existing proof of physical work protocols that exist right now do you think is doing the best job from start to finish, is the most sustainable?
So I think before that, mostly inflationary rewards were used to bootstrap the network. And I think there are actually two dynamics at play here. So there is the inflationary rewards, but at the same time, there is transaction fees that are getting accrued by the protocol actually being more and more used. And you can imagine here that as usage grows and as more transaction fees are getting accrued, essentially the protocol has to print less or issue less inflationary token rewards. And whenever you have like a relatively little usage, then you would essentially need to print more, assuming that you don't have like other forms of funding. And with respect to the token models, so yeah, we've been discussing here LivePeer. I think there are a couple of other protocols like Filecoin and the Graph that offer a kind of commodity services. So whether that is decentralized data indexing like the Graph, or decentralized data storage like Filecoin, these protocols pretty much require their node operators to have their skin in the game. So the token model here is stake for access. So essentially what you do is you stake some tokens in order to be able to do work on the network. And essentially what this thing does is that you incentivize participation into the network, and essentially this would lead to buying pressure for the token, so to value accrual for the token. And I think this model has been used relatively often in the past, but since relatively recently there is a second model that has been quite prevalent out there. And there are protocols like Helium and IOTX, which was mentioned by Stephanie before, who use burn and mint equilibrium token model. So here essentially the way it works is you have a sort of prepaid internet data plan whenever you travel abroad. So what you essentially do is you burn the protocol token, and then you get some credit for that in order to be used, for instance, for payments. And this usage is bringing the token price higher. So these are the two, so to say, prevalent token models, and I think especially for commodity infrastructure services, the first one, the stake for access, where you have skin in the game, is the one that is more suited. And for all the rest, you have burn and mint equilibrium. Perhaps here, Sami, in case you'd like to build up on top of this.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of just giving a good overview on both value capture mechanism or token frameworks. One thing I noticed at Mainnet was that the BME model universally was looked at as a model that worked and that for sure captured value. But I saw a lot of people starting to doubt its like value capture attributes, essentially, because we really haven't seen it like work properly. And so one thing I thought was interesting is initially Akash Network and Pollen were talking about using a burn and mint equilibrium model, but after talking to some of the team members, they said they were kind of reevaluating if that was the right way to go, because there really isn't any evidence showing that the burn and mint model works and that it does capture value in the long term. So I think that just goes to show how early it still is. And I know we hear that all the time in this industry, but I mean, the experimentation at the token mechanism level is still going on, right? So at the end of the day, projects are just looking at how they can reduce velocity and how they can add additional utility to their tokens. And, one of those, one type of utility that Stephanie was talking about is being used as like a payment token, right? So that adds a little bit of reduced velocity there, just because you need to hold the token essentially to access the network services. And so I think in the future, we're going to see some innovation start to pop back up, and hopefully we start seeing that in this bear market. But we're probably going to expand past these two token models that we see, which are stake for access and the burn and mint model, and hopefully see some new variation there that kind of can help to capture values for these networks. I know Dustin's done a lot of thinking on how and if these are going to capture value in the long term. So curious to hear your take here as well, Dustin.
Yeah, it's just kind of difficult, right? Because I mean, some of these are commodities and some of them are like kind of competing and offering like each of those are going to accrue value in a different way, in my opinion. But you're always going to want to, like, I think Mihai brought this point up, like scale the value of your token with sort of the demand, right? And the demand is always going to be on kind of sort of the application use case side. So like take the stake for use model. The value of the token is now going to be the marginal value of basically of the supplier, basically what they can earn. So let's say they can earn $1, they might be willing to pay 99 cents for the token, stake it, and capture that value. And that way you can really do scale with essentially the demand for the network. The question is how sustainable that is, like, and how volatile that is. And it's always going to be difficult for me to figure out how to find a place that you can have a constant equilibrium, right? Like you take equities today, you're reporting earnings on a quarterly basis. The volatility is like maybe relative to the market, but like, something like file storage, and we're going to do a huge migration of file storage, right? From AWS to Filecoin or whichever, right? And that's just a huge spike in volatility and price demand, right? And that's like uncomfortable for holders and what like. So, figuring out a way to capture value that's like in a smooth way, I think is going to be a way. And I agree with you, Sami. I think like looking for innovation around you basically just want to capture the value that you've got. Am I back? All right. You want to capture the value that you've got going on, right? So, and have it not be competed away. A lot of these are kind of commodities. So I think a lot of the value is like sort of actually going to be on the application integration side. So like sort of that business development side of things. So like if you're a Filecoin, can you build out those relationships with this application? And all sorts of
Yeah, I think a key point that you listed there too is like the volatility volatility created with these token mechanisms. So just like how they basically try to create a relationship between network usage and token price, what that can lead to is that if like network usage starts to decline, so should the token's price, right? And so you get into these scenarios that not necessarily like a death spiral, but I mean, it could essentially kind of lead to something similar to where if your network starts decreasing in usage, your token price is going to get hit as well. And yeah, that point that you touched on with these protocols kind of being able to operate similar to businesses is something that I think we're starting to see as well. So just looking at Helium, for example, they're competing with Pollen Mobile on their 5G network. But you're really seeing the importance of like business development and relations start to arise, because I think last week we saw Helium announce a partnership with T-Mobile, right? And the idea there is to create some type of, basically for the Helium network to become its own carrier, where you can pay, I think they were saying $5 for unlimited data, and you would use the Helium network. But in areas where there's no 5G coverage on Helium, you would switch over to T-Mobile's existing network. So I think it's interesting. We're kind of starting to see that play out, and it's probably going to speed up as well now that we have increased competition starting to show up on the DY or decentralized wireless part of the sector.
I think you brought a great point with respect to usage here, Sami, and especially in the case of Helium. It's not only about incentivizing hardware operators to actually acquire hardware and somehow connect it to the Helium network, but it's more than that. It's actually incentivizing them to actively transfer data on the network. And I think from the perspective of incentivization, being able to actually support increased usage is the way to move forward, and is the thing that is going to bring product market fit for essentially POPW infrastructure protocols. What we see so far is there is relatively little product market fit, so there is relatively little value generation, and then later on, value capturing is even harder because of the relative lack of the usage.
Maybe that's a nice place to move into our second topic. I think you guys made some great points with how we could see these proof of physical works scale and grow. Obviously highlighting connections with Web 2, if you want to call them that, companies like T-Mobile, and using BizDev to kind of grow their span is important. And the same sort of battle in a different way is happening on the blockchain between L2s, alt L1s, and modular chains. Does somebody want to give us a quick primer on kind of the backdrop of different approaches that we're seeing across these different projects and different spaces?
Yeah, I can get us started on that. So basically, L1, it sometimes gets really congested when you bring in tons of new users. We're seeing problems at the base layer where, long wait times or, really high gas fees, et cetera. It's just really, really hard to scale a blockchain. So, one of the first approaches, that we've seen in the space are layer twos, which are, effectively an additional blockchain that connects to the main chain and, posts all of its, data and state to be verified and, guaranteed by the security of the main chain. So in the case of Ethereum, there's Arbitrum, there's Optimism, et cetera. There's, tons of different flavors of, how you can connect an L2 to an L1. The most common being optimistic rollups or ZK rollups. I think we can go into that, maybe in this discussion or at a later date, because it's quite, technically complicated. But it's basically a way of, verifying that the transactions on the layer 2 are in fact valid and, agreed upon to be added into blocks on L1. So yeah, and then, alt L1s are, new L1s that we're seeing that are taking a very different approach to scaling. And some of the most famous ones we're seeing these days are, Aptos and Sui. Both of these projects came out of Facebook's DM project, which was, closed down, but, they were building a blockchain using the Move programming language, which is, entirely different than Solidity, which is, the most common programming language and, the one we see in Ethereum today. So Aptos and Sui they have, quite different approaches to how they're doing this, but it's more about parallel processing. So how can we effectively, make, remain on an L1, but, process different kinds of transactions in parallel. So transactions that don't necessarily, contradict with each other. So let's say I send, 1 ETH to Dustin and Sami sends 1 ETH to Doug. Those can happen not in they don't rely on each other, these two transactions. So how can we optimize for allowing things like that to happen at the same time, and hence, higher throughput? Again, very basic. They have, again, different approaches for how they do parallel transactions. And that's, again, a whole other conversation and something we could do in the future. But, that's one flavor of, some of these alt L1s with, parallel processing. And then finally, some of the modular chains. The one that comes to mind and, who presented at Mainnet is Celestia. So Celestia is now how can we separate some of the different layers, of a blockchain. So namely consensus and execution, data availability and settlement. And actually in L1 or like a monolithic chain, those are all getting processed, together, at the base layer. And so with Celestia, we're thinking like, how do we separate that such that, again, it's just in efforts to scale. So data availability. So basically, like the construction will be kind of a bunch of different roll-ups coming together and having all of their data be available with a set of full nodes and light nodes. And what's really interesting about Celestia and what's super, super novel about it and what really caught my eye is this idea that, the light nodes are data availability sampling is what it's called, and they're able to check chunks of transactions, and rather than like a full node, which is always having to verify and check everything, they're checking chunks of that. But in a really clever technological way, they're able to, with very high degree of certainty, as you add more nodes to the network, verify what the full nodes or the validator nodes are saying, and without having to do so themselves. So you kind of eliminate this problem of needing at least 2/3 of consensus nodes which are honest, because you have this other subset of nodes which are able to verify that in fact they are or they are not. Again, I think this is a little bit too deep for this purposes, so I'd love to open it up to the group, and we can chat about maybe some higher level things and give these technological concepts some. I think it would just be so much better. Maybe we can do another Twitter Spaces where we go deeper, but that would be the quickest overview I can give you today.
Stephanie, that was perfect, by the way. Last week, I read up a little bit on data availability and dank sharding, and my head almost fell off. So I agree. Maybe the simplest way to frame it is, what are the trade-offs in these different approaches? Why do you need to offload things like data availability? And what issues are they solving at a high level?
So, I mean, it's really all to me about like getting throughput. So let's just take the data availability problem, right? So writing a rollup right now, the way it works, and Stephanie, tell me if I'm stupid, but it does the proof and it writes that proof to it. Right now it's using what's called the call data, and that's only got like so much storage in there. And that becomes a problem in the amount of history that you've got available to you if you want to do fraud proofs and stuff like this. And it kind of gets very expensive, right? So because you're paying for like a small amount of storage that everybody's really competing for on the Ethereum layer. Whereas on something like Celestia, you say, all right, I want to get rid of all of that transaction computing, all of that other stuff that Ethereum's doing that we don't really need for the rollup, right? The rollup really just needs this data storage. So what you do is you say, all right, we take that away. Celestia does that, and you say, it's just way, way cheaper, right? So now you can scale the rollup. So like if you think about, how much it costs to send a transaction and do stuff on Arbitrum or Optimism right now, you're looking, a couple cents, right? Even up to $1 for like some more complex transactions and stuff like that. But if you really think about like, all right, how do we get to, 1 million users, 2 million users, 100 million users? That cost is going to scale up. Okay, so we need to start thinking, years down the road of saying, how can we actually get to those user numbers in a way that's cost effective? And that it really comes down to essentially the data availability problem, where we do need to make that ultra cheap and really be thoughtful on how we're designing some of these blockchains. So the modular thesis allows like your engineering team to get into each different layer and really kind of optimize it, specific for the application, the use case, and really get cost effective with it. And that's, to me, like really what we're aiming for with all this. And that's like kind of the end goal, because we're not going to just do NFT mints and a couple thousand people using DeFi, right? We've really got to, if we really want to actually make crypto successful, we've got to like get into the ability to optimize in the same way that we have now, and that's, to me, that why we're doing that.
Yeah, and I would just touch on for Celestia as the example, like there's a scalability trilemma, right? You're trying to enhance speed, scalability, and security at the same time, and that problem is really, really hard to achieve. And so inevitably, when you're designing these blockchains, like sometimes you have to like you don't favor one of them, and so easily you can go for if you want to make things cheaper and faster, and sometimes you might like lose out on like security and decentralization, right? So something I like about the design of Celestia is kind of like introducing this new paradigm for decentralization. So you're also getting this scalability. You're putting all of these rollups together, and you can have a high number of them that are processing different execution layers in parallel that, aren't related to each other. So you can work on, scaling, lots of different things. But then additionally, you have what's cool about Celestia is like the decentralization idea of like introducing these light nodes that are also able to, verify that things are happening appropriately. Because oftentimes, like, when you enhance for scalability or speed, it's a heavy processing power, on the nodes in order to be able to, execute like all of this, right? And so inevitably what you end up doing is, the costs start getting more expensive, and then it becomes more expensive to run a node, and you kind of get this eventual centralization while you focus, like a centralization at the layer of who can run the nodes and who's able to do that and who has the money to do so. So what I think, like, for me, like the winning design, like, and the reason why like this modular approach is really interesting as well is that not only are you, going for the scalability and the speed, but you're also focusing on these light clients that can be run by, pretty much anyone or on a cell phone or what be it, when this launches in the future. And they're able to also participate. And, you don't have to think about, there's only 100 nodes of the network and they're all run by the same few entities, because you can have, a lot of people join in on that and, making sure that the state is valid and that we all agree.
And for clarity, Steph, Celestia is running alongside other chains, correct? It's not a standalone. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, and again, super complicated, so I'm still wrapping my head around the way it all works, but it's basically like a collection of rollups. So a rollup could be, is a different chain in and of itself. So you could, attach Ethereum to that, or you could attach, other, self-sovereign rollups. But the idea is that, each rollup is sovereign and independent of the consensus and data availability layer.
So out of a question for the group, out of these different approaches, whether they be kind of ETH's modular vision or a couple of the alt-L ones that had main stage sessions or L2s, what would we say we're most excited about? Stephanie, you obviously touched on what Celestia can add to the ecosystem, but was there anything else that jumped out to people or was promising?
For me, it's a hard question to answer, right? Because, a lot of these things almost get you fairly similar results, right? You can do a parallelized processing chain on a Cosmos versus, like an Aptos chain, right? Or you can do a roll up onto Ethereum, or you could do a roll up on Celestia, right? To me, like, it's really going to get down to, like, really, what are the applications they're going to build on these things? What do they actually need? Like, what is that killer feature? And to me, there's a wide variety of things, and like kind of you get into the trade-offs of things. So, just because it's fast, does that mean it's also got users on the system? Like Ethereum's already got a lot of liquidity. It's already got trusted security. It's kind of already got that sort of brand image, if you will, versus something like an Aptos does not. So if you're a builder building these applications, is that a trade-off you're willing to make? Maybe yes or no. Maybe you need the parallelization in the high throughput, right? The sub-second finality. Maybe that's really important. So for me, it's like kind of this blend of both is kind of what I think we'll gravitate towards, where we need the sort of existing, presence, if you will. So, you're going to want to have like, all right, users already got MetaMask downloaded. Users already kind of trust Ethereum, even like your call it institutional users or like, corporation type users. Like there's a trust with Ethereum there, and you've already got a lot of infrastructure, best coding practices, etc. And I think builders are like kind of value that, right? Because like you're gonna like you think about coming out of a bear market, you're gonna have to like get a whole new set of users and like educate them again, and it just could be a little bit easier to me if you're on Ethereum. And if you do get, there's something fuel. I don't know if we touched on or not, but like. They get parallelized, sub-second finality too, because they've got like this high performing execution layer. So, that's sort of a blend of both, where you kind of got Aptos-esque, like not all the, cute features you do get with the move language and everything, but, is that kind of a blend of the trade-offs, right? Is that get you where you need to go? But just to, boil it down, it really, to me, going to come down to the builders. What do they need and like specific to their application? I think that's like really what we need to focus on, and like we need to start asking ourselves, really, what is that next level application, right? You know, if it's decentralized social or something, right? Okay, that has a different set of user requirements, cost requirements, and stuff like that. You know, if it's you know, more DY and like we're really kind of using this stuff, then from an infrastructure perspective, all right, that's a different sort of throughput. So, you know, we need to nail down exactly what is that application we're targeting, and that'll to me define what the key or the winning base chain is.
I totally agree with Dustin on both the developer needs.
But also, Stephanie, you're
also,
really in the weeds on, I guess, more of how all this is really architected out, right? I mean, so like, do you think there is like a key like winning feature? Do you think it is like the self-sovereignty of like the Celestia rollups? Is that like to you, like as you study stuff, is that really what you think it is? Or, you know, also the group, if you guys also got opinions, Mihai, Sami.
Yeah, I'll let Mihai take over. I think Dusty might not have heard him, but he had just gotten started there. But I do largely agree with you what you said. It's kind of depends on you know, the specific needs of the project that's being built. But I'll let Mihai take it away.
yeah, totally. I agree with you, Dustin, both on the developer needs, but also on the next type of application that will need to be built. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned Ethereum, that is currently so popular and has attracted like so many developers. And even if we look in terms of like scaling needs, if we look at you know, the number of daily active users, so Ethereum has like 500k daily active users. But then if we abstract away to, let's say, the traditional world, and we look at gaming, so we look at Fortnite, and it has 30 million daily active users, and it has several million players that actually play concurrently. And if we go towards social media, if we go to Twitter, which we are on just right now, yeah, this is 240 million daily active users. So essentially we see like so many orders of magnitude higher needs than what currently the scaling solutions are offering. So maybe in comparison, I read the other day an article about how Lens protocol will scale to 50k users on Polygon. So if you're putting like 50k versus you know, Twitter like 240 million, this is like a huge gap. And my main takeaway is that all the scaling solutions currently haven't really been tested with one of those killer apps that you mentioned, Dustin, and that it's still going to take some time for each of them to prove their product market fit with useful apps.
Yeah, I agree with you in general, Mihai. I think there's still a lot of testing that's needed for some of these modular solutions and L2s that are being built. But I mean, when I take a look at the space right now, there's a lot of teams that are starting to build like applications for end users. And right now, they're just looking for blockchains that can meet whatever needs they have right now, right? So like, if you're building this new application, I mean, you're not really focused on what's going to be in the future, like how long it's going to take Celestia to get up and running and how long for it to kind of just generate that trust, which is just based off time. And what I'm seeing, kind of relating this back to TIPIN, is that a lot of these protocols or a lot of these applications are just deciding to launch on Solana for the most part, because although Solana does have its problems based off performance and just kind of like being online, it is one of the furthest all L1s that has solved a lot of the issues that we've kind of been talking about. And it kind of goes back to like where I see builders going to right now, and it's kind of like Solana and Ethereum. And so in the future, I'm kind of maybe pose this question for you guys, but do we see like existing applications eventually pivoting over to some of these new chains, or is it going to be like newer applications that end up launching on newer modular chains or just newer L2s?
I guess like when I'm thinking about the future of all this, I'm just so bullish, like, all the scaling solutions and like how it's going to all come together like in the far future. So I think like people or projects will probably go with what they're most comfortable for now, because it's like, okay, we know Solidity, like we know we can launch on Ethereum or an L2, and that's probably like where you'll see it first. But then again, kind of back to what Dustin mentioned, I think it's going to be really dependent on the needs of your system, because like, do you need that parallel processing? Do you not? Right? But I think that it's like, I don't think it's going to be kind of having to. It's so hard to articulate what I'm trying to say, but I think like I don't think that some of these like newer modular design chains or parallel processing chains are going to necessarily like completely overtake something like Ethereum that has just gained so much market share and so much, I guess, clout, you could say. Everybody wants to be involved with the Ethereum ecosystem because Ethereum is like they're committed to scaling and they're committed to iterating, and Ethereum in 10 years from now is going to be so different than it is now. So even if some of these modular or Alt-L1s look more promising in the short term for some of the things that they can offer that are seemingly maybe even more advanced than the short-term Ethereum roadmap. I just think that builders are going to continue to build, and including on the scaling front for Ethereum, and it's going to continue to attract a huge market share. Just like having that being known as the first, and having that ethos of how it got started to be the world computer or whatnot. So that was kind of a vague answer, but I think I'm just really bullish seeing like how blockchain design, whether it be brand new paradigms and brand new chains, or whether it be iterations of the current ones we have today, and what it's going to look like in 10 years when hopefully we've reached a point where we can accommodate most projects on a variety of different flavors of chains and scaling solutions.